Yeah. So
Yeah.
you were speaking of grandchildren, and you'll appreciate this. I've reached a point in my career as a head of school where I'm hiring people now who are, the age of my children and younger. And
Much younger.
I was in a meeting and I was talking about how I had this one particular specialist on speed dial, and she's one of the first names I go to on my Rolodex. And I had this look from the group in front of me when I said the word
Oh
Rolodex,
God. You
like
said Rolodex.
I said Rolodex, I was speaking a foreign language.
Right.
Well, have you seen that video where they put two teenagers in front of a rotary
Oh, I
phone?
love it. I love it. I took my nephew when he was 7 or 8. We were in an antique store, and he was looking at a typewriter, and and he was a manual typewriter, and he was trying to find the screen and what buttons to push. It was quite a novel experience to see technology through his eyes.
The
But
corollary to that is somebody who actually let their child at an antique store type on the typewriter, and they thought it was so cool that it printed immediately.
right. It was instant. It was instant. Well, I think the piece that all of us have to be aware of is that we're living in an age right now where the technology that's in front of us is changing in the microsecond, and we need those young people to keep us sane and settled and directed, because
There was a wonderful AT&T ad a few years ago with the grandparents welcoming their grandchildren and loving them and handing them all the devices.
right. Fix it all.
Mhm.
Help me
Yeah.
figure this out. Help me understand. I think one of the things that I'll share with you is an understanding. I've been an educator for over 30 years in my career. I've taught from preschool through graduate school, and have been a school administrator now, heading an independent school for the past 15 years. I have never seen anything like this past year. I've been an educational leader through 9/11, through Sandy Hook, through Columbine, through the current George Floyd racial tensions that we're facing, and the need for greater understanding around inclusion and equity. But I have never seen anything like this past year as an educator. It has been stunning. One of my colleagues said to me, teaching as a career, as a passion, is probably one of the most conservative jobs that people take on, right? I mean, people go into education, you get your students, you get your room, you close the door, and you go to it. And there's really the passion is within the people who are in the space. This year, we have gone through, I would say, 10 years of change in 1 year's time. We've been called upon to turn our skill set and our profession upside down, and to figure out new ways to do things that we never thought we would have to. It doesn't mean the face-to-face notion of student and teacher will go away. Face-to-face learning is not going to stop. But the changes that we face, the technology that we've learned to use, that's not going to go away either. I joke with my faculty, there are a whole group of words and phrases that I will no longer use. And I'll probably end up using a couple in this talk anyway, but I never want to find myself having to use words and phrases like pivot and nimble, and bubble and cohort. I mean, there are words like I never used the word cohort until this year, but I use it all the time now. Abundance of caution. I am never writing the phrase abundance of caution.
Always hated that one.
Right. It is what it is. Light at the end of the tunnel. These interesting times. scenario planning, just around the corner. I'm never using these phrases again. They are totally out of my vocabulary. I hate them uh, because they're overused now. We have come to a point in education where if you're not nimble, you're out of business, and you're seeing public schools. Unprecedented. That's a good one, Penelope. Thank you.
Right, Penelope.
Um,
And will everyone else mute, please?
you know, we've had to change in process, and I think it has made us a stronger institution, but it's also shown the holes and gaps that exist in education as a field. Right? I'm in Southeast Michigan. I'm 15 miles north of Detroit, and the measurements of the haves and have-nots in online learning, in virtual learning, is poignant. You see every day um, the difference that our school is able to have with our children when we can give our families choice of in-person or virtual, when we can give our children an opportunity to be in school every day, 5 days a week with teachers, having a real program of learning, and 15 miles away, they can't do that. They can't figure out how to be in session. They don't have the funds to make sure that there's internet connection in the homes where children are trying to learn. We've always known that there was that inequity, but it is painted large and stark right now. Um, I've talked with my faculty about um, an acronym that the U.S. War College uses to describe this year. I say we are in the year of VUCA, and I don't know if you know VUCA. VUCA stands for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. VUCA. When you're dealing with the military and you're trying to describe the planning that you have to do beyond the written plan and the implementation, you live in the area of VUCA. That's me. I spent all last spring and summer working with task forces to build a plan to get us to be able to figure out, A, if we could open school, and B, if we could, what would it look like? And we wrote a beautiful plan. I mean, I got smart people around me. I have intelligent faculty and community members. We wrote a wonderful plan to get school open. But just like the War College, the plan that you write is never the plan that you go to war with, right? Once you hit the ground, the plan is worth nothing except the paper it's written on. And so I had to come up with a whole new understanding of VUCA for the operations of my school. So instead of volatility, I talked about values. I talked about our school core values, right? I talked about compassion. I talked about respect. I talked about responsibility. And you have to know that the only way that you can connect with parents and children when they are afraid for their physical well-being and their emotional well-being is to have compassion. Frankly, it didn't matter that we were able to deliver an academic program. We did, and it's a strong one, but it wouldn't have mattered. What was important was the compassion and connection that we had with our families, because they were going through the same sort of challenges and hell that we were. You had families who were stuck at home, working from home, right? You've got two kids sitting at the kitchen table or on the floor while mom is in another room and dad's in a different room, and they're draining their Wi-Fi trying to work from home, or not able to work, or they've lost jobs, or someone in the family is sick. School becomes really far less important when you come to those human pieces. And so working with our teachers to help them understand that, yeah, your content is really important. And I know you love to teach it, but you have to understand who you're working with and the families that are going through crises every day. So that understanding of our core values and compassion being one of them was really critical. Um, so the U in VUCA was uncertainty. For us, it had to be understanding, right? We had to understand. I had to give my teachers permission that they couldn't do what they always did, and to be okay with that. My teachers are perfectionists. They love what they do. They live to be with their children, to teach what they love, to be with them every day. And they couldn't deliver what they always wanted to deliver, like the same amount, the same number of books, the same number of projects or activities. I had to give them permission directly and say, look, you can't do it. And no one should expect you to. You just have to have an understanding to do the best that you can do, that we're going to ask for grace from each other. The C in VUCA was complexity. This was my favorite message to the families. For us, it was caring. And for I had a shorthand. I said to teachers and to administrators, I said, more Maslow and less Bloom. More Abraham Maslow and the pyramid of needs, and less Benjamin Bloom and you know the hierarchy of questions and problem solving. More Maslow, less Bloom. And it became a shorthand in meetings, right? When a teacher would go down the rabbit hole and want to talk about the project that they weren't able to get done, or some child who wasn't turning in their homework, or the test that they weren't able to finish. Stop, slow down. More Maslow, less Bloom, back up, right? I think you're dealing with high achieving people. You're dealing with people who want more faster. I have a gifted school, a talented population. They want more all the time. And COVID doesn't comply. It's just not a friendly, it's just not a friendly setting. The A in VUCA was about ambiguity. For us, it was agility. And I know that's one of my pet words not to use, but it was about agility. Schools in general don't change quickly. The culture of educational institutions, it goes back to the ancient Greeks. We don't change. We don't like to change, right? And this year has been all about change. You know, I'll go into the building tomorrow with a list of things that are on my schedule to do, and I could get a phone call at any time that one of my students just tested positive. And I have to turn everything upside down to figure out how we're going to contain that cohort and limit the spread, work with the county on contact tracing, and figure out how to keep school going while still making sure that I'm caring for the health of the community. That's been the dance that I've done all year. It's been how do I keep people safe and still deliver the Roper education that is within our philosophy and mission, right? Because, you know, I mean, when you look at our buildings, we don't let anyone but teachers and students into our buildings. We don't let parents into our buildings. You know, we're a school where parents are used to, you know, setting up camp in our cafeteria and having conversations all day, where we have parents helping out in classrooms, where we have parent association meetings and coffee talks and bringing in speakers and working in partnership. They're used to being present all the time. I can't let them in the building, right? I'm doing all that I can to contain the spread. And at the same time, you watch the news, I'm in Michigan. I'm at the epicenter of COVID, of the COVID mess in the United States, right? Our 7-day weighted average for positive cases is over 17%. 17%. 6 weeks ago, it was 3, right? That's how fast it's changed. We went from 3 to 17% in 6 weeks. It's crazy. And so I'm dealing with a combination of people who are exhausted from all of the protocols, to people who are fighting politically about whether they believe that there's really a thing or not, to my doctors and medical professionals in my community, telling me every day that there's no space in the hospitals, that the hospitals are full. And at the same time, I'm trying to take care of 2-year-olds to 18-year-olds every day, to keep them engaged, distracted, to help them love coming to school and not be afraid of school. For some of our children, they don't know what it's like to come to school without a mask. That's just what you do. That's just normal school, right? I've got 2.5 and 3-year-olds. It's their first school experience. They come to school with a mask every day. That's what they do. So let me stop and tell you a little bit about the school, because I think that will help give you a context for why we've had success in fighting through all of these issues. The school is a place that has just an amazing story and a phenomenal history. We're an 80-year-old school. It's an independent co-educational school. So we're private, we're tuition-based, secular. And we have 2 campuses, one in Birmingham, Michigan for our 6th through 8th graders, and one in Bloomfield Hills, Michigan for our preschool to 5th graders. We were founded by this couple, George and Anna Marie Roper, who were religious refugees from Nazi Germany. The Ropers grew up just outside of Hamburg in a boarding school called Marienau that was run by Anna Marie's parents, Max and Gertrude Bondi. Max was a World War I veteran, a real intellectual in art history, and he had the idea to build this boarding school that was a progressive school, standing up against some of the traditional German teachings of the time, a school that would be based on democratic values, a school that had outdoor education programs. He was a man who was ahead of his time. He was working on educational philosophy at the same time as people like Rudolf Steiner, Maria Montessori. He studied people like Vygotsky. So he understood progressive teachings and progressive ideas of education. His wife, Gertrude, was a medical doctor and one of the first women to become a psychoanalyst. She was a student of Sigmund Freud and graduated from Freud in psychoanalysis. And she brought that understanding of psychology and the holistic approach to teaching children to the boarding school. So you had this intellectual and psychological balance in the boarding school. And it's where George and Anna Marie were raised. Anna Marie, as she grew up, went off to Vienna and studied psychoanalysis with Anna Freud, and had left Vienna just after the war had begun and the Germans had moved into Vienna. It became very clear as the Nazis came to power. Oh, I should mention that the Bondis were converts to Lutheranism. They were born Jewish, and after World War I, Max decided that the family would convert to Lutheranism. The Nazis didn't care. They were Jews. And so when the Nazis came to power and the Nuremberg laws were passed, the Bondis were not allowed to own property. They were not allowed to own their boarding school. And it became very clear that they would not be able to stay at Marianao for much longer. And George Roper, who was a student and then about a senior in high school, about 18 years old, and not Jewish, he was able to get documents for them that didn't have any religious labeling on it. So the stamp of J was not on their documents. And basically the Bondis left in the middle of the night to Switzerland, left everything behind and moved to Switzerland, where they opened a boarding school for refugee children, La Rayon. And they were there for about a year and a half, when they began to correspond with friends in the United States and were able to get passage to the US. This was about 1938 or so, 1937, 1938. And with friends, they bought property in upstate New York and founded another school called the Windsor Mountain School. The Windsor Mountain School was an East Coast progressive school that existed. It just closed within the last 15 years. But the Bondis brought their ideas and their philosophy to Windsor Mountain. And George and Anna Marie were teachers in Windsor Mountain for many years. Harry Belafonte was one of their parents later on in time. Anna Marie's brother became the head of school eventually when the parents retired, Heinz. Heinz has this distinction during World War II of being one of the Ricci boys. I don't know if you know the story of the Ricci boys. They were a group of German refugees, mostly Jewish, who were trained by OSS to go back into Germany behind lines to interrogate Germans and interrogate German prisoners, and were part of some of the original spy networks that existed in World War II. George and Anna Marie stayed at Windsor Mountain until 1941 and decided it was time for them to move out on their own. They had friends in Michigan and decided that was a place to go. And they moved to the Detroit area, where they opened initially a preschool. And then they bought property in Bloomfield Hills and opened the Roper School as it is today. The Hill House, which was their home, they lived on the top, on the second floor, and the school was on the main floor. My office is in what looks like an old Hill House bedroom. And it's amazing to think about 250 little kids in that house before we expanded and filled out the rest of the land to now have 550 kids on 2 campuses. I share this story with you to give you an understanding of where the Roper philosophy comes from. So the Roper philosophy, its core tenets are around this notion of ensuring that children always have voice. Why? Because voice was taken away from the Ropers and the Bondis when they were in Germany, right? They wanted to make sure that future generations would stand against totalitarianism and not be cowed or quieted, that we wanted to raise children at their youngest age to have voice. We wanted to make sure that there was a focus on justice rather than power. Obviously, because power was used to take everything from them, and there was a lack of justice in how they were dealt with by the Nazis. A notion of equal human rights. This notion of inclusion and equity and diversity is built into the very fabric of their experience, right? Anna Marie, when I sat and talked with Anna Marie before she passed away, she would talk about this notion of having identity put upon her rather than having a chance to own her identity. I asked her about this notion of being seen as Jewish when she saw herself as nothing but German. And for her, that never left her. She didn't dislike the notion that it was something that of being a Jew, but she hated the notion that she didn't get to choose, that someone else chose her identity for her. One of the pieces of the philosophy that I think has been so prescient is George and Anna Marie talked about preparing this current generation for an unknown future.
Oof.
Right? Well, my God, that was their whole life, was an unknown future. And that's what drives us as a school, right? How do we prepare children for unknown futures? It's not about math content and science content and reading content. So that's important. It's about critical thinking, right? It's about communication skills. It's about understanding each other. It's about compassion for, as the Roper said, compassion for this world, for themselves and this world. The values of the school shape our decisions. And so to be able to open Roper during COVID meant that we had to make sure we could live those values and not just have a school that was open, but it had to be the Roper school. It wasn't enough just to have math and reading class. It had to be a place that was centered around community and relationship building, because those are the foundations that make the school successful. Right? If you don't build a sense of community, then you have nothing. Then you have nothing to do with the educational piece. I'll show you how that's played out. When a lot of schools built their plans and published them, and how they were going to open and how they were going to keep people safe, many of my colleagues wrote documents that were legalistic, right? You must do this. You must wear a mask and you must keep distance. And if you don't, we will punish you by sending you home or expelling you or punish. It was really punitive. What we talked about was a covenant. What we talked about was not a legal document, but a moral one, right? How do we take care of each other and do what is right, not because we'll get punished for doing what's wrong, but do what is right because it's the right thing to do. Do what is right because, as George and Anna Marie taught us, we are interdependent. That your well-being and my well-being depends on us doing and caring for each other. That's how you self-actualize, going back to Maslow, by understanding the balance between seeking self-actualization and knowing that you're interdependent. Right? That's the beauty of the place. And it plays out every day in so many wonderful ways. I'll tell you two stories and then I'll stop and we can chat. The first is a story about my friend Holden, who is 3 years old. And people always ask about how we give children voice. Well, Holden discovered voice very early on in a way that is truly Roperian. So we're in Michigan and it snows all the time. And one of the banes of my existence as head of school is I have to wake up early in the morning, like 4:30, 5 o'clock, and figure out whether school's going to be open or it's going to be a snow day. I hate it because I'm always wrong. It doesn't matter what I call, I'm always wrong. There's always someone who's going to call me and say, you did the wrong thing. One winter we had 4 or 5 snow days. It was just an abysmal winter. And Holden was getting really upset by the fact that he was missing school. And he went to his teacher, Colleen, and he said, Colleen, who makes the decision about whether we have a snow day or not? And Colleen didn't skip a beat. She threw me right under the bus. She said, David does. And Holden said, well, I need to see David. I need to speak with him. Remember, he's 3. So he turns around and he walks out the preschool door, down the hallway, and Colleen lets him because she knows there are adults along the way that are going to make sure he's okay. Walks down the hall, past the receptionist, up the steps, right around the corner to my office, walks past my assistant and into the office. I'm not there. My assistant, Emily, says, Holden, can I help you with something? Holden looks at her really seriously and says, I need to speak with David. So Emily says, well, would you like an appointment? And Holden kind of scratches his head and he says, well, what's that? Well, an appointment is when you sit down and you make time to be with each other and have a conversation. I want one of those. So Holden gets in my calendar. He's on my book for 1 o'clock. He goes back down, tells Colleen that he's got a 1 o'clock appointment with me, and Colleen's all set. So I come back into the office and Emily looks at me and says, you're in trouble. Holden's looking for you and he's not happy. You're in trouble. So 1 o'clock comes around and I decide I'm going to go down to see Holden. Right across the hall from his classroom is a conference room that I use for board meetings. And so I go in and say, Holden, it's time for our appointment. And he comes out and when we go into the conference room, he sits in the board chair, I sit in the board chair, and we have our conversation. He says, David, we can't have any more snow days. I said, well, tell me more, Holden. Why can't we have any more snow days? He says, David, I've been trying to finish my ocean project for the last 3 weeks, and I can't get it done if we keep missing school. We can't have any more snow days. I said, well, Holden, you know that I don't like snow days either, but I have to call them to keep all of us safe, right? I have to make sure that the buses don't have accidents. I have to make sure parents can get to school, the teachers, can get to school safely. Yeah, but my ocean project, David, I can't finish my ocean project if we're not in school. I said, well, Holden, I will do my very best to not have more snow days, but I can't make you that promise. Fine. And we finish our conversation, agreeing to disagree. And Holden goes back into his classroom and Colleen says, so Holden, how was your conversation? It wasn't good. He's not gonna say no more snow days. But that was our conversation. Now, what I love about the story is the way all of the adults along the way interacted with Holden, right? His teacher, the receptionist, my assistant, and the conversation that I had with him. All the way along, he could have been shut down. And in schools across the country, every day, kids are shut down like that, right? They have something they want to say, something that's important, a sense of injustice that needs to be addressed, and they get shut down. But why? They don't need to be, right? He was given an opportunity to have his voice heard. And he learned a lesson that being heard doesn't always mean being agreed with, but being heard is something we do when we respect one another. That having voice is valuable, and we can learn from each other when we listen to each other. And it doesn't matter how little you are, doesn't matter how old you are, we can still listen to each other. Right? So Holden, a couple years later, Holden sees me in the cafeteria and he comes up with me and he starts sharing stories with me about what he's building in his STEAM class, right? About the robotics work he's doing. And he is now in 6th grade and he and I talk all the time. Because the other thing that happens when you give kids voice is you build relationship, you build connection, right? And you build an honest connection, right? I didn't lie to him. I didn't make stuff up, but he and I now have trust in each other. And that's a value that comes from our philosophy. The last thing I'll share with you is one last story about another student of mine, a little boy named Aldous. And Aldous is a 1st grader. We're fond of talking about our Roper students as being asynchronous. They are gifted in so many different ways, but not totally gifted in every possible way. So like I have 6th grade students who are taking calculus, but can't tie their shoes, right? I mean, I have kids who are in kindergarten reading at a 5th grade level, but are walking around with a stuffed animal. They're asynchronous learners. They have many gifts, but not in all content areas and not in all developmental areas. So my friend Aldous loves space. He loves everything to do with astronomy. He could tell you the names of every astronaut, every space project plan. He knows about the solar system. And the New York Times had recently published this piece on black holes, and he wanted to tell me all about it. He caught me in the office while I was checking in, and he got me into this conversation. David, did you see the New York Times article about black holes? He's 7, right? Or I'm sorry, he was 6 at the time. He was going back and forth about black holes and about the research that's being done in dark matter, and my head was hurting. And finally, his mother, who was with him, pulled him away and got him to class on time. But I took this story with me back to his teacher later on that day, and I said, Sarah, I have to tell you about what Aldous shared with me this morning. He was telling me all about space, and it blew my mind. And Sarah looked at me straight-faced and she said, yes, Aldous needs to learn a lot about space, personal space.
Ooh.
He needs to learn all about the distance he has from he and his peers. Space is something for him to keep studying. But those are our children, right? And those are the kids that we build relationships with and we care for all the time. I tell families, you're paying tuition for a Roper education, but that's not a transactional event. There is nothing transactional about teaching and learning. You think you're buying a school experience. You're not. Kids aren't cogs, right? Teaching and learning is organic. You're not buying test scores and a promise for a placement in some secondary and some post-secondary placement in a college or university. We'll help you do that and we'll do it well, but that's not what you're going to Roper for. We are not transactional. We are transformational. The relationships that children have with adults and their peers change lives and build a love of learning that lasts their whole life. And if we've done our job right, they will change this world in ways that will be amazing. And I won't have to deal with COVID anymore.
Mm.
I'm ready for the next pandemic. I think I become an immunologist in a short period of time. But I see every day children changing that future, unknown future, so that I won't have to. And it makes me want to get out of bed every morning and go to work and do it again. So let me stop and talk with you and see whether there are things that I can share about anything I've said. But it's a job I love doing.
Merle?
I'm very moved by the philosophy of the school. And I would think one measure of how successful you are is the ties that remain once the students graduate. I'd like you to talk a little bit about the alumni.
Yeah. So let me tell you about 2 in particular, because I'm very proud this past couple of weeks of two of our alums who you probably saw in the news. Tiffany Cunningham, who was just named to the Federal Appellate Court. an African-American, one of the first African-American women to be moved to that level by President Biden, one step away from a Supreme Court seat. She is now there, and then Michelle Adams, who's another attorney based in Chicago, in fact. Michelle has been named to President Biden's team to review the structure of the Supreme Court.
My question was a little different. Separate from accomplishments of graduates, I'm wondering what is the complexion of graduates maintaining relationships with the school?
Strong. We have an alumni council that we're an 80-year-old school, so we have an alumni council that's made up of people who have graduated 50 years ago, and maintain connection through reunions, through actions. We just had this past 2 weeks ago Alumni Spirit Week that was all service learning based. And one of our alums was leading a project in Flint, just north of us, where they've had the lead water crisis. She's developed a business that's converting used water bottles into eyeglasses. She's working with local optometrists to give sliding scale eye visits, and then manufacturing glasses for them through this nonprofit she's created.
And how does that connect to the school today?
It connects to the school because she helps to come back and talk about, we have something called Alumni Day. How do our alums live our philosophy? So she comes back and talks to our students about work that they're doing. Our seniors develop senior projects, capstone projects that have service learning as a component. But the notion is that you take the tenets of the philosophy with you into your practices, into your life, into your work. I'm sure, like most private schools, we have our venture capitalists, and people who are making money, but they also make time to do good.
Betty?
Is Roper a boarding school or just a commuter school?
The day school. It's a commuter school. We pull in students from over 50 zip codes in the Southeast Michigan area. And one of the things that's happened as a result of COVID is we've also begun to pull in students from outside of Michigan into our home learning program.
My next question was, is Roper an individual institution, or is the Roper philosophy used in other schools?
It is unique to our school. We are a mission-driven independent school.
David, you'd be proud of Anshi, because the Anshi you and I knew had huge potential and horrendous flaws. It has become the dream I always had for it, and that you were foundational in. And it's a joy watching my grandchildren at that school and seeing my children being parents.
Yeah. And
the values are good. It's sounding a bit like Roper. I have never read the principles at this point, but it became something really caring and fine. I'm curious, in this era of two-dimensional learning, you've got three-dimensional, as does Anshi Emmett. What good is going to come out of it? I assume you're working on raising resilient kids. What do you do to do that? I mean, are there any positives you're able to create out of COVID.
Yeah, I think it's, so I think there's two directions for the question. One is internally,
Of
and
course,
one is internally, and one is externally, right? What are we doing to help our own community grow from this, and what do we have a responsibility to do beyond our own community? I think internally, I have challenged us. I've challenged our teachers, our parents, our students to think about how we come out of this stronger. And when I say stronger, I don't mean with a bigger endowment or more students, or a bigger program. I mean, how do we use this moment to get closer to our philosophy and core values? It's easy when things are quiet and calm to get stuck in the transactional, to get stuck in I'm just trying to take all these great courses and have these great experiences and to be focused on the self. What I think what COVID has reminded us is our responsibility to a broader community, that our interconnectedness in this community. I said after the 2016 election, I said to one of our veteran teachers, we have lived on the laurels of George and Anna Marie's teachings, that their philosophy was always wonderful words. But now we are called upon to live those words as values and to act, to do, right? So what does it mean to be interdependent? What does it mean to be involved in service learning? What does it mean when we say we're a school that is for the whole child, not just the intellect, but the social growth and the emotional growth of children? We are going to have children going back to school post-COVID who are going to have mental health challenges and emotional challenges that we haven't even begun to think about, right? When we exhale from the stress that we all feel, we're going to be in a moment of PTSD, and our children are too. And as a school, we have to be prepared to put our arms around them and ready to care for them in ways that we haven't before. And that means English and history and math aren't going to be as important as advisory homeroom and service learning projects and activities where kids are sitting talking. That it's going to take time, and we have to be able to give that time. I think externally, we are seeing education in our country laid bare as being incredibly inequitable. I worked this past 3 years with colleagues at the College of William and Mary and Wayne State University through a grant from the Ford Foundation on a public-private partnership between Roper and Detroit Public Schools. And our job was to work with teachers in both Detroit Public Schools and Roper to identify gifted and talented children and to work on program to deliver that. It was supposed to be a 3-year project. We got through year 1 and COVID hit. And we shifted our project to how do we work on access to whole child learning when technology is not available. So we shifted our grant money to fund both technology for DPS students, how to use the technology, and then we got our counselors involved to providing emotional care and support to families in both communities. Again, being nimble, right? Shifting when you have it, but we had the funding and we had the partnership, and we weren't going to lose a moment in time to support a project that was needed. And what comes from it is now a relationship that I have with Superintendent Vitti and his team in Detroit Public Schools, where we can continue to do good work in other areas.
David, I was just reading today and getting the shakes. Are you having to train your student body in run, hide, fight?
So, yeah, of course, right? I mean, that is the nature of schools around our country. I have on my cell phone, and every teacher has on their cell phone at school, an app that can lock the school down with a push of a button. I meet every month with public safety in both cities, in Birmingham and Bloomfield Hills. We do drills, both for the adults and for the children. But that is the nature of our country. That is, and I would be negligent if I didn't do that.
All we had was the atomic bomb
Right?
and,
Dr. Pepper.
and
desk.
hid under desks, which,
I'd give anything for that goofy turtle.
oh God, yes.
Penelope?
Penelope?
Except I had to unmute. Sorry, I actually unmuted before I started talking. Slow, but I learn. Aside from the fact that I do not wish the environment on you, and probably half the population of the country would be appalled at the way you run your school. I wish you were the Secretary of Education instead of this all over the country. One comment is it seems to me that when you talked about, I love the story of Holden. It's marvelous. That when you talk about Holden having voice, that you also give, I was impressed that everyone is known by his or her first name,
Right.
or is modern grammar their first name.
Yes.
It seems to me that you also give voice to the receptionist, to your assistant, to Colleen, the teacher. That does not happen in every school. It isn't just the students who don't have voice, but that one thing I wasn't clear on, and I guess these are two different questions, but I'll link them together, is Roper by definition a school for
Gifted.
how generally accepted definitions of gifted or not? And can what you do, I mean, it just sounds marvelous in every way. You know, my inner child loves it, and my grown-up loves it in terms of what it does for preparing people to deal with what we have no idea is going to come down the pike in their lifetime. Can what you do and I use that word, is it possible for what you do to be scaled up? So two things, I guess, is, are they gifted by some generally accepted definition as opposed to we're all gifted kind of thing? And two, can it be scaled up?
So the short answer to the gifted question is yes and no. We are a school for the gifted, but we do not subscribe to a traditional definition of giftedness, which tends to be domain-based and focus on more and faster. When we talk about giftedness at Roper, we go back to our psychological Freudian roots, right? So we talk about precocity, right? Children hitting developmental milestones faster than normal. We talk about complexity, that they think things through in complex ways sooner than is the norm. And then we think about intensities, passions. And for this, we go to the work of the researcher Kazimir Dabrowski, who talked about overexcitabilities. And Dabrowski talked about psychomotor, sensual, intellectual, imaginative, and emotional excitabilities. And each of those is on a continuum. which could put you at a gifted level, or you could be at an extreme, and we could be talking about things like ADHD or autism or bipolar or personality disorders, depending upon whether those overexcitabilities were off the chart. For us, yes, we'll use IQ scores as a initial screening, but it is not the be all end all of our admissions process, right? It is a much deeper level of processing. Anna Marie Roper did her research on what she on what she referred to as and looking at different ways in which people learn. She talked about both quantitative measurements and qualitative measurements of how you assess children's giftedness. Now, can the Roper program be scaled? Yes, the Roper philosophy absolutely can be. We have chosen as an institution to focus specifically on the gifted population because we believe they're underserved and they need a bubble in which to grow and develop and to evolve to be able to become the leaders that we need them to be. George did some incredible work with a gentleman from Columbia University in the 1950s by the name of Harry Passaw. And Dr. Passaw did the initial research on gifted education that we combined with Anna Marie's notion of psychological perspectives.
David, it was interesting. Israel got a gifted school, I don't know, 20 years ago. And I remember hearing a lecture by the founder. And he said these kids had been so isolated that they were brilliant in their own areas. One of the young people came to the head very excited because he'd lost an argument.
Right.
It had never happened before.
I think the piece that people lose track of around giftedness is that you're not just gifted when you're in your math class or your English class for 45 minutes, right? You're gifted 24/7. And the challenges that you have are about who you are, not what you do. So you're gifted when you're on the playing field playing baseball. I had a baseball player who was calculating the trajectory of curveballs on the bench, right? You're gifted when you're in theater. You're gifted when you graduate and you're in college. You're gifted as an adult. Anna Marie Roper did exceptional writing on gifted adults and what it was like to have relationships with other people as a gifted adult. She even wrote about her last book was about gifted senior citizens and what that experience was like. The notion
Here we are.
she was very clear about the idea that this is not something you turn on and off. This is an identity.
Shoma. And I want to connect the two of you. I think there's fertile ground, but I'll do that offline.
Thank
Oh,
you.
yes. That's, I'm listening to it and thinking, Shoma's just sitting here going, yes, yes.
I was just quietly listening, but thank you. I'm very
No, Shoma has a very special project, but I'll do that offline. I think you'll find it interesting.
Shoma has special friends. That much I'll agree. They're all here. I have a question about what you were saying about Mr. and Mrs. Roper.
Mhm.
The fact that she wrote about life, what did you say, gifted learner isn't, gifted adults and gifted senior citizen isn't surprising in context of the fact that she believed in lifelong learning. I would be surprised if she didn't believe in gifted seniors and gifted retirees. What I'm interested in is when you said value, you made from VUCA into value, understanding, compassion, agility.
Mhm.
So in putting that in what they did to come to America, her if please correct me if I get it wrong, she said she didn't want to be known only as a Jewish person. She identified as German. She disliked the fact that an identity was put on her. So since the school is named after her, how do you measure in a child things like compassion, this sense of finding your identity, because it develops over time? How do you measure? I understand how you measure IQ and test results. I'm very curious, how do you measure compassion?
Yeah, I don't know that you measure compassion, but you provide opportunity to be compassionate.
Okay.
You provide opportunities to engage with others and to show and to model and to demonstrate what compassion looks like, to talk about it when you see it and why it is so. I think those are teachable moments for children. Um, that's part about building community. Um, at the start of this COVID year, when we were talking about whether or not we would actually be able to be in person, my lower school teachers in particular wanted to work our darndest to get at least 3 or 4 weeks at the start of the school year to be in person, because they used the beginning of school to build classroom community, to build classroom understandings, to build relationship and connection, to help understand how they're going to get along. They build the rules of the road for their classroom, and they tie it to the Roper philosophy. But the idea is, by building community, everything else is possible, right? By building relationship, you can create an environment where learning can thrive. And when we got those first 4 weeks in person, we just sort of exhaled because we knew that we had our baseline to build from.
I'm sorry, I think I didn't phrase it right. I was wondering about your teachers. This compassion, the fact that your teacher, Colleen, knew not to stop the child and say, don't bother David, that is what I'm looking for. Like, how do you select compassionate teachers? Because oftentimes teachers will be like, I have to perform, so my children are doing great. That's their measure stick, because one does have to protect. How do I perform, and whatever it is that they say? Because I find that very interesting. How do you select to find compassionate teachers? Maybe they didn't get all 100s in every their ranking, but they're the kind and engaging ones, kindness, that'll really encourage a child to grow, because it's about the teacher, about the students and not the child. That's
So
what I'm curious.
we have, I think, one of the most complex and arduous hiring processes that I've ever seen in any school. Sometimes it makes me just shake my head because it takes too long, but the outcomes are incredible. It involves, first of all, teams of teachers, students, and administrators. It involves a series of interviews in person and then demonstration lessons. And then it involves conversations about those lessons and an expectation that you've done your homework before you apply, so that you can talk about the philosophy and give us a chance to ask you questions about the philosophy. We want to make sure you have an understanding of equity and inclusion. We want to make sure that while I may not be able to measure compassion, I can measure equity. I can measure inclusion. And in creating environments that have diversity, equity, and inclusion, I can have a place that is just. And so I want to know that people just don't show up and send me a resume because they want to work at Roper, but they have to know something about Roper. We rarely hire first-year people out of school. It is a rare thing to do. Generally speaking, we're hiring people who know the difference between working in our environment and working in another one, that they see the freedom and autonomy we give teachers in creating program in exchange for buying into and embracing the core values we have as a school. and professional development that we insist on them having going forward. So we will insist that all of our teachers participate in a program called SEED, seeking educational equity through diversity. It's a requirement. We insist that all of our teachers participate in a program called SANG, the social and emotional needs of gifted children. We will insist that every new teacher take our history and philosophy class with our school historian and learn about where our school came from and its roots.
Mhm.
So we have a core set of programs that we expect our teachers to do, but also our parents. We expect our community to be versed in the core values. You can come to Roper thinking that you're coming for AP classes and placement in a great college, but we're a school that's about social justice that serves gifted kids, not the other way around.
Joseph?
Hi, thanks for a great talk. I went to St. John's College, which shares certainly some of your ideals.
Sure.
I got a couple of questions. I just talking about one is related to what you're saying and sort of goes to this question of measuring. If in fact, as we all did, you had to change for the year of COVID, you're like, look, it's not about history, it's not about English, there's other priorities that we have to attend to. And then you said, well, it was you think it was a success. You did a success through the COVID year. How do you know? How do you know that the COVID year, because I'm doing some alternate projects too. I want to think they're successes. I wonder how you think that your COVID year was a success. That's one. And the other one was, having done some projects in education with technology, we found we often had to actually give the technology, give the hardware. And I'm wondering if you actually have to do some of that too, give the hardware as well as the coaching and well as the support to get the balance to work out. But thanks a lot. It was a really great talk.
Sure. I'll answer the easiest one first. Yes, we often give the technology to families. In fact, in several cases through COVID, we've also given our families the opportunity to have hotspots in their home because Wi-Fi was a challenge. So making sure that there was equitable access, and that's actually something that's going to have to be ongoing because while we weren't a bring your own device school before COVID, we will be now. Yeah, we absolutely will be now, and we've got to make sure that all of our children have the tools they need to be successful. And look, we're a private school that charges a lot of money for tuition, and so socioeconomic diversity is always on our mind. And so we make sure that we have the funding to be able to provide those laptops or iPads or hotspots to families and to children, and to make sure that they are comparable to anything that any student would carry with them during the school year.
St. John's was very much that way too. No one was ever denied entrance into St. John's for lack of ability to pay. And the alumni have really rallied around that.
How do I measure that we're successful this year?
Yeah.
I measure that we're successful because I've got people who are healthy, both physically and emotionally. So truth be told, if we gave standardized tests and we don't, I wouldn't care what the scores were. I mean, I mean, by all measurements of what we've done historically, our kids are still getting into their colleges of first choice. They're taking the classes that challenge them. Kids are learning how to read. They're learning how to do math. But they love coming to school. 95% of my children are in person. The other 5% would be in person if it weren't for a medical need of them or their own or their families. That's a measurement of success, right? My counselors, I want to give more money to than is possible. They are working overtime to keep up with the health and well-being of our families. Our homeroom teachers and advisors are doing incredible work, just touching base with people every day. So I measure success by the fact that our retention rates are better than they've been. I measure success by the fact that we've had 3 Zoom open houses in the last 3 months. We never do technology-based open houses. We're about being in person, and we usually have 20 to 30 people at an open house. I've averaged 70 people at an open house in the last 3 open houses, right? Our admissions is out of the ballpark, right? And, before COVID, it was flat because demographics in Southeast Michigan are flat. But we've demonstrated something to our community that we are capable of being successful even in hard times and living by our philosophy even when we're most challenged.
Eddie?
Thank you.
David, you've given us this incredible picture of the Roper philosophy, but you weren't there for your whole career. Did you have a Roper-ish philosophy prior to going to Roper?
It's really an interesting conversation.
Great question, Betty.
Yeah, I think you are shaped and guided along the way and mentored and given opportunities for growth on each step of your career path. And I actually was a student at Anchiemit before I was a teacher at Anchiemit. But I was shaped by faculty there. I think when I moved to the laboratory schools, I became a student of pedagogy, a student of education. Right? I studied to be a teacher, and I had a chance to practice teaching at Anchiemit, but at lab school, I became a student of how to teach. And I had mentors there that reminded me that teaching and learning wasn't about what you teach, it's who you teach. So when I hire, you asked me earlier about hiring. One of my favorite questions to ask someone is what do you teach? And if they say anything but children, we have to have a longer discussion, right? So lab school shaped me and gave me opportunities to think about school leadership. And prepared me for my first headship. And I was given the opportunity to head a school in New Haven, Connecticut, the Foote School, similar in many ways to lab school and being in a university community, working with university families, high expectations, and that shaped me. I learned a lot about school governance, about working with a board of trustees, and how to sustain a school.
That's a lesson. That's a whole other.
Oh, my goodness me.
I got a PhD
Not
in
just in
trustee.
education, anywhere.
Oh my God, that was incredible. And then I came back to the Midwest and had a chance to do something that teachers talk about all the time. I had a friend of mine who was running a school that was going under. It was floundering. It was in Kalamazoo, Michigan. It was in a university community, and it was going bankrupt. And I had a chance to come in and actually build a school almost from scratch. And I was there for what I thought was going to be 1 or 2 years, became 5 years, and took a school that was near bankruptcy and got them to a balanced budget in their first capital campaign.
Wow.
And that's when I made the shift after that to Roper. I tell people about Roper. A lot of my jobs, I've had to assume an understanding or a philosophy that was the school's and not necessarily my own. At Roper, I get to be myself. I don't have to change who I am and believe something I don't believe in. Just before I was hired, the last step in my hiring. So I went through like this 3-month ordeal to be hired as head of school, and I was the chosen candidate. and the board chair said, David, there's just one more conversation you have to have. And then we're all set to offer you the contract. He said, we want you to have a conversation with Anna Marie Roper.
Mhm.
So, okay. Now, Anna Marie was 91 at the time, living in Northern California. And I figured, oh, this will be like a 10-minute conversation and then we're good to go. So I get on the phone with her, and 3 hours later, after talking about everything from neuroscience and psychoanalysis and teaching and methodology and Dewey and Piaget and Vygotsky, oh my God, all of my educational philosophy classes, it was just such a treat. I knew when I hung up the phone that the first thing I was going to do after I signed the contract was to get on a plane and go see this woman while I had the chance, while she was still alive. And she and I actually had a chance to spend time together on 2 visits before she passed. It was just the most inspiring thing I've ever seen. When you talk about how you want to live your life, this is a woman who was curious to the day she died. She was writing books until the day she died. She had an assistant that she was dictating. She was writing books and writing essays and doing research. She died at 92, and she lived a rich, full, amazing life. And I just feel blessed to have a chance to have met her and spend time with her. But I know I'm the steward of her legacy. That's my responsibility. And she has 3 wonderful children who I'm friends with and keep in close contact with. But I know that I'm carrying a torch and a special responsibility for something that she built, she and her husband created, that I firmly believe in.
What's
Good
interesting,
karma. Good karma.
what's interesting, David, is I knew you all those years ago and saw all of this without having the vocabulary to describe it. But you were like a wonderful flower bed that already had the seeds, and your life experience just made sure the fruits and the vegetables and the flowers and everything grew. And it is such a joy to see who you've become, because you were that person then. You just hadn't had the life experiences or the mentoring or whatever. When I said you were the most gifted teacher I ever knew, I wasn't kidding.
Thank you. That's high praise. I appreciate that.
Well, we were boon buddies back there, Penelope.
So I have a question about the constituency you haven't spoken of yet, which is parents.
Yep.
I have read, and I'm going to read some of this because I'll forget all the adjectives, but that there are, if you ask parents whether they'd rather have kids who are respectful of their elders, obedient or well-behaved, or on the other hand, independent, curious, and self-reliant, the answers will largely track with political party and preference. So the former are more likely to be conservative, the latter more likely to be liberal, red, blue. But you've described children who you talked about someone who a small child who was studying happily calculus and couldn't tie his shoes, and another who was fascinated by everything to do with aerospace but had a little bit of trouble with personal space. These are not easy children to raise.
Yeah.
Of what your philosophy was.
You're right.
How do parents come to you? And you mentioned, that you are a private school with a high tuition rate, but aim for socioeconomic diversity in it. And how do they continue to interact with you?
Yeah. So parents come to us generally in one of two ways. They start out with us as families of 2.5-year-olds at the beginning of the educational experience and just never look back. That's pretty rare. It's about a third of our families who are lifers. Most of our families come to us, I would say, largely around third, fourth, and fifth grade, when they have had experiences in another school that haven't gone well, that their gifted child is bored, disruptive, not being challenged, been labeled or mislabeled something, and they've had a conversation with a clinician, a therapist, another educator or friend, or they've known about us before and didn't think twice about it until now. And now all of a sudden they're calling us um, looking for guidance, looking for direction, looking to see if we can meet their need. And what generally happens is the child has a 2-day visit with us for admissions process for the next year and doesn't want to leave, right? Children often say, or parents will say, I found my people. I found my kindred spirits, right? Because as I said before, we're a school for gifted children. That doesn't shut off, right? It's not you're gifted in just this 45 minutes and then you're back with the general population, right? All of our kids, all of the time, are dealing with their peers who have similar profiles. And it's our job, philosophically, to meet the needs of each of those children independently, to have individual plans for them. We're small enough to be able to do that. We have reading and math groups that are sometimes 1 and 2 children, right? So you individualize the experience. Now, is that scalable in the public schools? Of course not. Of course not. That's why our tuition is what it is. But the expectation is that if we say yes on the admission side, we're going to meet that child's need and challenge. And we have, every year, we spend over $3 million in need-based financial aid to ensure that tuition isn't something that keeps a child out, that a child who qualifies to be there finds a space there.
And the ongoing relationship with the parents?
So the ongoing relationship with the parents is education based, right? Teachers are teaching parents as well as children. Administrators are teaching parents as well as children. Right? Our job is to help educate how to raise not just an adult, but a gifted adult. Right? How are we helping children? How are we helping parents? See, the challenge parents have is they're fighting against a media that's telling a different story about education and school experience, right? What they're experiencing with us is very different than what is happening, 10 blocks down the road from me at the local public school. In admissions meetings, I'll tell a story about this local school that has a sign in front of its car drop-off area. It says, a little sign that says "Kiss and Go." And I know what it means, right? It's the school being helpful, right? The parent pulls up on their way to work. There are a couple of teachers there who help the kid get out of the car, take them in and get their day started. Parent drives away, right? I understand what that means. We're not a kiss and go school. Right? My expectation in non-COVID times is if you can, as a parent, park the car and come in. Stay for a coffee talk when we're bringing in speakers. Find ways to work in the classroom to support your child's teacher. If your job won't allow you to do that, talk with other people in our parent community about ways in which you can participate and be connected. When we bring parents in to the school, we're not just admitting your child, we're admitting you into our community. And our expectation is you're going to be a community member too, that you're going to be a lifer as well as your child. And that if I'm doing my job right as head of school, our relationship continues after your child graduates, right? That our relationship and connection continues. We continue to help each other and talk with each other and work with each other, even beyond graduation, because we're not kiss and go. It's not transactional. We're part of a community, right? People can graduate and retire from a community, right? They think they can retire and graduate from a community, but that's not true. When you're part of a community, you're part of a community forever. That's what community is. It's connection.
Thank you.
I wish I got, some of you had somewhat similar schooling. I wish I had had it. You did, Merle, I think.
Almost everything you said about your school, I experienced. The difference was it wasn't exclusively for gifted.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the kind of faculty that is required to deliver on your philosophy is really, really exceptional. When I think back over my elementary and high school experience, so much of what you said resonated. Early in my professional career after college, I worked for an educational publishing company. And I had a lot of experiences with teacher organizations. I was on the marketing side. And it was so antithetical to everything I had personally experienced. You know, I'd go to meetings, I'd go to conventions. Sometimes I'd go into curriculum meetings, or I'd go into a principal's office or a district superintendent's office. And everything was about how much vacation they got, how many, what do you call them, days off when you go to meetings. And it was never about the kid. And I always found that such a strong disconnect from my own experience. Obviously, I'm judgmental, but you know, I don't know how you instill a love for learning when all you can think of is the next day off that you get.
No, they are a special group of people. I think we exchange autonomy for that commitment, right? One of the things that won't surprise you is with COVID, I have to keep my building closed, after hours so that we can do cleaning and deep cleaning on evenings and weekends. That's the biggest complaint I hear from faculty. They want to be in their rooms, in their space all the time. I mean, our average tenure for our faculty is over 10 years. I have faculty who have been with me for over 40 years. And for me, it's making sure that we can create programs and systems to keep those who retire still engaged in the school, right? Just because you retire doesn't mean you leave the community. I want them to still volunteer and connect and be mentors to new teachers. That institutional memory that they have is vital.
You know,
That's part, excuse me, Joseph, that's part of the reason I asked the question about the continuing involvement with alumni.
Absolutely.
Because the school I went to had a motto above the proscenium in the auditorium. A school should be a model home, a complete community, and embryonic democracy.
I love it.
I don't know if you recognize that quote, but
Where'd you go to
Latin,
school?
isn't it?
I'm sorry, Joseph, I interrupted you. What?
no, it's okay. It's gone. It's gone. You already addressed it. It was perfect. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Okay.
Could you tell us about your homeschooling? You mentioned homeschooling. What is that?
So our virtual program is called the Roper Home Learning Program, and we created it specifically for COVID. So what we've done is I have two versions of the home learning program. I have it synchronous and I have it discrete. So the synchronous program is faculty teaching live students in front of them and home learners virtually on the screen at the same time. That's a challenge.
Wow. Yeah.
Mhm.
That's a real challenge. And one of the things that we're working toward for the fall is moving away from that. The other piece I have is something that is discrete, where we have teams of students who work with a team of teachers specifically who are virtual all the time. And that group tends to be those who are not going back and forth. They have medical needs that are keeping them home. They won't be on campus anytime soon, or they are distant, right? As I mentioned, I have a couple students, one who is in California and one who's in China, who have stayed on with us after relocating. And they don't go back and forth. They're in the home network with a discrete group of teachers all the time.
Joseph?
I just you remind me of something in socialist countries, for example, Sweden, where I've done some research. You're a civil servant your whole life, including when you retire. And so if you go to a research library or museum in Sweden to research something, they will call the retired researchers in your field to come and meet you and take you to the collections, and they're thrilled anybody is trying to look at something that they did, and they already know all of that material. So it's a really wonderful way, I think, that they have. When there's a researcher that comes in, they bring the retired and they become good friends of mine too over the course of it. But it's a really wonderful way of connecting them to the research and sort of keeping a vitality among the research, really, too, where there would be danger for generations' ideas to be lost a little bit. A connection keeps going. But I admired that a lot about the Swedish system.
It's a wise model to hold on to that institutional memory and to keep it vital.
Penelope?
So I want to talk about the Roper Home Learning Program
Mhm.
with a very particular and personal reason, which is I have a daughter of my unrelated, who is my unrelated sister's granddaughter, who I believe would fit your criteria. In Petaluma, California.
Okay. I would recommend two things. I would recommend first that she take a look at our summer program, because we're going to have an online summer program to get a feel for what things are looking like, and then to also be in contact with our admissions people as soon as possible to talk with them and to introduce each other.
Okay, I mean, perhaps and we can do this offline, but I just wanted to, if it's a possibility, I'm so excited.
It absolutely is a possibility.
To have a connection to the material that I can present, because obviously her mother, who's marvelous, I think she's the child, her children are in Montessori schools. They're either in Waldorf or Montessori, I don't remember which, in Petaluma. She would, I think, be interested, but she clearly, certainly knows nothing about you. I'd like to connect with what I can send her to introduce you to her, and then she can introduce herself, should she wish to you.
I'm happy to do an email introduction, and in the interim, you can send her to our website to read about us, roper.org.
We got that. So, thank you.
Yep.
Thanks, David.
I have one last question, if you
Sure.
don't mind.
For the moment.
For the
Yeah,
moment,
sure.
right.
I'm very fascinated, the fact that you keep talking about philosophy, Roper philosophy. So do you teach philosophy to middle school students? Because it's done in Ireland. In fact, the Prime Minister insisted that all the schools teach philosophy. I feel you could teach philosophy to elementary school students. It's done. I was curious, do you do that?
We do. So both the Roper philosophy and broader philosophies in general. I will share that one of my passions now is to find ways to get back into the classroom on occasion. And the last couple years, I have become an aficionado of Michael Sandel, and his Michael Sandel is a philosopher at Harvard. and he has a class that he teaches called Justice, What's the Right Thing to Do? And if you like, you can see his class live on PBS. It's all recorded. But his book is really powerful, and I've done a philosophy class with our high school students, 9 through 12. We teach the Roper philosophy beginning in preschool when our 2.5 and 3-year-olds, because that's where Anna Marie Roper spent her time. You're teaching core values, right? You're teaching a humanistic understanding of how we get along with each other. You're teaching social justice. Kids understand that. Kids understand fairness and equity. They understand inclusion and exclusion. They get that, right? The other thing that Anna Marie was so wise about was not to talk down to children.
Mm.
Right? They're human beings. You give them opportunities to learn, real opportunities to learn. I don't think I mentioned this when we talk about voice. We have 2 students who sit on our board of trustees, who are voted, elected members of our board of trustees. They're my boss. They evaluate me, right? I'm accountable to them as I am with the rest of the board. That's giving children real decision-making practice, right? Not hypothetical, not make-believe, but they vote on the budget, right? They vote on policy, right? They vote on decisions that are critical to the sustainability of our school. And they have to do the work and are accountable to their peers and to the community by having that role.
And it all takes a great amount of time, which most teaching institutions are not willing
Right.
to do.
You got to make the time to do it well.
Mm-hmm.
And look, where you put your time and energy tells everyone about your values,
Mm-hmm.
about what's important. So you make the time to do it well because you're raising future leaders to lead in the unknown future.
Shari?
I want to give you an example of the opposite of your philosophy.
That's not hard.
I lived in Huntington Woods for 1.5 years.
Down the road from me.
Yep. And my Italian children were put into an American school for the first time. And my older son was also taking guitar lessons, which was next to the police station for some reason. You know how big Huntington Woods is. And David had an idea that if he took a bottle of Elmer's glue and put it, just a little of it, under the wheel of the police car, the car would glue itself to the ground. And then if the police had to drive away, it wouldn't. So he did this with another kid whose mother was on the pickup service. I had dropped them off. And the mother was so irate that she took these 2 little seven-year-olds into the police station and told the police they had to be put into jail for defacing property. The police were looking down at these 2 terrified little kids and told the woman, well, why don't you just take them home? And I don't know. The police called me as she was driving them home and told me what had happened. She said, he said, your son is terrified. I hope you won't punish him. I said I would admonish him for not using the right glue. I mean, I just couldn't believe this. So David got home and I said, is there something you want to talk about? He said, absolutely not, and ran upstairs to his room. She called me to tell me that her child was going to spend the next 2 weeks sitting in the corner after school, looking at the wall. And I thought that was really a productive kind of punishment. I couldn't believe it. The mentalities were so small.
No.
And had we stayed in Huntington Woods, we were just there a year and a half, we would have been Roper students. Unbelievable people.
No, the police had a better understanding of child development than the mom did.
Oh, the mom was dreadful. She was awful.
And she probably had a horrendous education too. You know, people
Probably.
are only secure within certain boxes. Some
Mhm.
people are.
Yeah. Fascinating stories.
Hmm.
I love what you're doing there, David. It's wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you.
David, this was joyous. Thank you. I'm going to make a suggestion on the summer material to Tal because
Oh, right.
her oldest daughter is gifted. Her little guy is developmentally not so good, but loving and dear. And COVID and Zoom practically killed her.
It's hard.
Yeah.
One of the highlights of my year has been that my oldest daughter, Amber, Tali's compatriot in school, who worked for the National Science Foundation, was able to relocate from Washington, D.C. to Michigan.
Oh,
She is living just 6 miles away from me, and her oldest daughter, who's 7, Ada, is in our 2nd grade. And I get to be from January forward, I am a Roper grandparent. It is
oh,
it is the
Wonderful.
most wonderful thing that has ever happened to me.
That's great.
something surfaced on my desk, which I don't know why it surfaced on my desk, which was an
Can't see it. It's
It's
upside down.
production of Annie with my daughter as Annie. And I just looked at my desk and there it was. I hadn't been looking for it. But it is very interesting getting the right educators in charge. And I know Tommy and Alon are thrilled with Anchi.
Good.
Tali and Anthony have picked the public school route. And Anya's in a gifted public high school. So it's interesting, you know. But it would be fun if I could get Miss Anya in the Rovers.
That would be fun for you.
She's a very fine little artist. So, yep.
David, how old are the two children who are on your board?
They are 10th graders, so they are
Okay.
they're 16 years old.
Okay, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
Just
I
marvelous.
love that.
Just great.
Are those two board members selected by other students or by grown-ups?
They are elected by their peers. They're elected by students as student representatives, and they have an obligation to report all of the work that the board is doing, to be a conduit to the board, and they meet with me on a monthly basis to talk about initiatives and work.
I think Holden is going to be your next board member.
Hold him maybe the board chair before he's done. But
Love that.
they serve on committees. So they're on, one is on policy and building and grounds. The other is on development and education.
It's great. It's just wonderful.
Thank you.
They'll be educators too.
Thank you, David, so very much. This has been just,
Been
This
wonderful.
was fabulous.
Good, I'm
And
glad.
David and I have reconnected on Peloton.
Yes.
That's kind of fun.
Oh gosh, that's one of the things that saved me through COVID is just having some routine to my day that keeps me fit and clears my head.
Yeah, I still have to, on some days, convince myself, get on the bike.
Yep.
I always feel fabulous, but all the little badges, I make sure at the end of the day, at the very least, I do the meditation so I have an unbroken line since the day I got the bike, except the day I had a bee bite and I wasn't sure I should do it. But, you know, we have all found our creativity too. And this particular gang has, you know, we go down a lot of rabbit holes exploring. And when you talk about curiosity, this is a group that is exceptional. And we always have pads next to the computer because somebody is referring to a movie. So, but anyway, I am going to connect you with Shoma because I think there are some interesting things, connections to be made there. Shoma's Nourishment Project is really exceptional and is right up your alley. If it works for you in the school, fine. If not, the two of you will enjoy each other.
Thank you. I would really very much like that.
Look forward to it.
And say hi to Elaine.
I will.
Okay.
I will.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Ciao,
everybody.
it's been a pleasure. Ciao,
It's been
ciao.
wonderful.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you, Barbara. Thank you, David.
Yes.
Well, I mean, I've been a fan, as David knows. Hello, Diane.
Yeah. Everybody, thank you, David. It was wonderful
You're
Oh,
welcome.
hi. Hi, Megan.
at the same time.
She's redecorating.
Bye. Thank you.
Take
Ciao.
care.
Take care. Bye-bye now.
Ciao, ciao.